The farmer would have known his fields the way he knew his own hands. Every furrow, every slope where the water pooled, every patch that ripened first. So when he knelt in his field in the summer of 536 and found frost where there should have been green wheat, he didn't need a scholar to tell him something was wrong. He only needed to look up. The sun was still there, but it gave no warmth and almost no light. A pale disk behind a haze that never lifted month after month. Some who lived through it said the sun looked like the moon. Others simply stopped writing, because there was nothing good left to record. For roughly 18 months, according to contemporary accounts, the sky over Europe, parts of Asia, and even the Americas stayed dim, and the world beneath it began to starve. What could dim a star? For 15 centuries, nobody could say. The answer was frozen out of sight, waiting in the ice, and when scientists finally found it, they didn't find one disaster. They found the opening chapter of an entire decade so brutal that Harvard medieval historian Michael McCormick would later call it, flatly, the worst year to be alive in recorded history. To understand why this hit so hard, picture how little room for error people actually had. No global grain trade, no refrigeration, no warning systems, just the sun, the soil, and whatever grain was left in the storehouse from last year. So when the sky dimmed and temperatures across the northern hemisphere dropped by as much as 2 degrees Celsius, it wasn't weather. It was a slow-motion collapse, cut into a tree that had stood for over 1,000 years, in Scandinavia, in the Alps, in California's Sierra Nevada, and you'd find the same scar in the same year, growth that almost stopped completely. Whatever had happened wasn't local. It was written into trees on opposite sides of the planet. For centuries, that was as far as anyone could get. Historians had the descriptions: a darkened sun, failed harvests, but no cause. The breakthrough didn't come from a library, it came from a glacier. In 2018, a team led by climate scientist Michael McCormick drilled deep into an ice core in the Alps, reading it the way you'd read tree rings, each frozen layer a record of a single year's atmosphere. At first they expected to find one bad year. They found something worse. But the glacier wasn't finished telling its story. Buried in the layer for 536 was a chemical trace that pointed straight to a volcano. Ash and gas punched so high into the sky that it spread across the entire globe, drifting between the Earth and the Sun for months. Researchers have pointed to a likely source in Iceland, though it remains their leading theory rather than a settled fact. The sun hadn't failed. It had been buried under ash no one could see, and this is where the story should have ended. One eruption, one terrible year, recovery to follow. It didn't. The ice held 2 more of the same signature in 540 and 547, 3 global volcanic winters, striking the same starving population within a single decade. No society on Earth, ancient or modern, is built to absorb that 3 times in a row. And into a world already stripped bare by failed harvests came a second catastrophe, one that didn't fall from the sky. It arrived on the backs of rats. In 541, plague broke out in the Egyptian port of Pelusium and moved along Mediterranean trade routes with terrifying speed, reaching Constantinople within the year. The Byzantine historian Procopius, writing as it unfolded, described bodies accumulating faster than the city could bury them. Modern genetic testing of ancient remains has since confirmed what he saw: Yersinia pestis, the same bacterium behind the medieval Black Death, striking 8 centuries earlier than most people realize. Some estimates put the death toll in the hardest-hit regions between a third and half the population, though scholars still argue over the real number, since 6th century record-keeping simply wasn't built to count a disaster this size. Here's where the history stops being abstract. The Byzantine Emperor Justinian was in the middle of an audacious campaign to reunite the shattered Roman Empire when he caught the plague himself, and nearly died in his own palace while his tax base, his army, and his workforce collapsed around him. Historians still debate exactly how much the illness derailed his ambitions, but the timing is hard to ignore. An empire straining to rebuild Rome, struck at its most exposed moment by a disease no one saw coming, and it wasn't only the Mediterranean. Chinese chronicles from those same years describe a yellow dust falling like snow and widespread crop failure, a strange echo suggesting the climate disaster's reach went further than historians once assumed. What's almost stranger than the decade itself is how completely it vanished from memory. For over 1,000 years, 536 was a footnote, a monk's odd line about a dim sun, filed away and forgotten. It took ice cores, tree rings, and ancient DNA extraction, tools nobody alive in the 6th century could have imagined, to finally connect a monk's diary entry in Ireland to a volcano in Iceland, to a plague in Egypt, to an empire in Constantinople. 4 pieces of evidence sitting in 4 different archives that had never before been drawn into a single story. Nobody living through it ever knew the full shape of what was happening to them. They only knew that the sky had changed, and then the sickness came, and maybe that's the real weight of what the ice revealed. We tend to picture catastrophe as one dramatic blow, a war, an eruption, a plague, arriving alone and ending. But the worst year in recorded history wasn't caused by any single disaster. It was 3 eruptions and a pandemic, landing back to back on a world with no defenses against any of them. Somewhere in Ireland, a monk closed his account of the darkened sun without ever learning what had caused it, or what was still coming for the decade ahead. We know both now, and that knowledge leaves an uncomfortable question hanging over every ordinary year since, including this one. How many disasters would it actually take, arriving together instead of apart, before the margin we live on turns out to be thinner than we ever let ourselves believe?